of these videos are especially high, and I think those are ways that we can also quantify the impact that you're having, because it's not just local, it's not just dollars. Like, you mentioned one way to quantify Robinhood is that the donations are coming in. You can see dollar signs, but with YouTube, with all the other avenues, like with LRN, it can be tough. How many people are listening? At any given time, you don't really know, but right. You are.
Yeah, and I'd like to add really quickly, speaking of Derrick J's Victims Crime Spree, so a lot of the reason I'm in Keene is because of that movie. And there are other great folks. Like I met a gentleman in 2011 at Pork Fest, and he, we were kind of talking, and then I met him again in 2012. Steven is his name. Him and Daryl were kind of like, and I watched Derrick J's Victimless Crime Spree. That was kind of what pushed me over the edge. Like I just made the move. I mean, I had like no plans, and I was just like, okay. Like I went to Keene for a week. I applied for a bunch of jobs. I threw everything in my, I started driving back. I got 3 interviews lined up. I threw everything in the car and just moved in like 2 days. So I probably would not recommend doing that, but I still got a lot of stuff at home, and but.
By the way, we're over time, but nothing happens in here until 11, so I'll just keep going. We'll keep going as long as you guys are cool with staying, right?
Yeah.
As long as y'all have questions, we're going to keep this going. But just to answer your question, Dustin, you mentioned the radio, LRN.FM is what I program. It's a radio network, and Derrick and I both have shows on that network. The intention of LRN.FM is to provide a signal for people that want to run a radio station. That's actually one of the main purposes that I created the network for. Yes, it's a nice place to go to listen online to liberty-oriented talk. So there's dual purpose. There's one, to give people good talk radio content to listen to, hopefully both people in the movement who want to hear new shows that they've never heard of before, and people who don't know anything about liberty, which of course the broadcast radio world is a good way to bring people to these ideas who otherwise wouldn't find them. Because if you want to find my show or Derrick's show online, you have to seek it. You have to look for libertarian podcasts. So it's easy for us to get the seekers, but to find those who don't know about us and don't know about liberty, that's where broadcast radio, I think, is very, very useful. In Keene, we've had a couple of pirate radio stations, community stations, whatever you'd like to call them. There's one in operation right now, as a matter of fact. Technically that's our third station. The first 2 lasted about 8 or 9 months before the FCC came sniffing around, and the operators of those stations decided at the first threat they received that they were going to shut down. So eventually it would be nice to see what happens when an operator continues operating even under that FCC threat. But it was interesting when one of the stations shut down. We actually heard, it's interesting who you hear from.
Yeah, that's funny.
Fred Parcells, for those of you who have been following the Free Keene blog, this is one of the code enforcers in town. Fred Parcells made a comment recently about how he can't get the signal in Southeast Keene, and he wants to listen to Free Talk Live in the morning when he's driving around doing his code enforcing. Judge Burke told Mark Edge when one of the stations went off a couple years ago. Judge Burke, who everybody knows if you've watched the videos in Keene, he's the judge in district court. He was in the YMCA working out, as he tends to do, and Mark was working out at the Y at the same time. And Burke knows who Mark is, and Burke made a comment to Mark about missing listening to our radio station, and he wondered when it was going to come back on the air. So, not only do you not know whose lives you're touching as far as just, the regular folks out there, it's an amazing number of the bureaucrats themselves and the government agents who are listening and paying attention, and that can't be a bad thing. So, do we have any other questions at this moment? All the way in the back.
You might want to mention the jail guards also watch.
The jail guards. I mean, all kinds of people watch what we're doing.
No, I'd like to address the question that has been on the floor for a while. Is people come up and say, "Well, I really like what you're doing, but your methods are wrong." Okay. And I think there can be a really good way of handling that. First of all, they're giving you agreement. So my idea is to sell it to them. What is it about it? What is it about our goals that you really like? Okay, because they've said, well, I like your ideas, or I like what you're trying to do, okay? What is it about? And really sell it to them, you know, find out how much agreement there is and really cement that. And then say, okay, what methods would you use to accomplish this goal? Where are they gonna go? They might come up with something creative.
Yeah, that's true.
Anyway, that was all, I just wanted to bring that up because I hadn't heard anybody say that.
Any comments on that?
Yeah, and I'd say one thing, you know, some of the methods we use, you know, like if we're going out chalking, I mean, that's just like a cheap, easy way to get your message out, whatever it is, right? Like people will look at it and they'll read it and you know, they'll think about it, whatever you're chalking. And it's because we don't, you know, necessarily we don't have a platform to reach a huge number of people. Like if you chalk something, like let's say in front of the courthouse or whatever, like don't take the plea or whatever, you're reaching people, and it's like a lower cost way of like holding a sign or whatever. And it's because some cases you don't have a platform. We obviously have a lot of tools we can use. Like there's a local access television show called Cheshire TV. A lot of activists in Keene produce shows and they put them on there. There's a guy that just moved to Keene last year. He's been writing. There's a couple people that write letters to the editor, which I think is huge because there's a lot of people, frankly, that they won't go online, they won't watch television, and the newspaper is still their medium of getting information. I really appreciate the people that do those kind of things, and I mean it is very difficult to reach everyone, and you know it's just like you got to keep going, and like Garrett's real big into chalking, and I love it, and you know. Do we have any more questions?
I actually got a brief comment on that. Yeah, I should clarify, a lot of the people that say like, oh, I agree with like 80 or 90% of what you guys do, it really comes down to, well, I like the Second Amendment, and I think we should get back to a constitutional republic, but other than that...
Yeah, and it's like, to the gentleman's point, I like your ideology, but not your methods. And then they suggest a method that's, well, they've been doing that for 200 years. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, I don't see any impact. I'm not gonna, I can read history. You know, I'm not gonna spin my wheels and do something that I know is not gonna have a result.
That was my point.
Yeah, and I think it's a great point to bring up. I mean, you know, let's just take, if you look at like abolition or the civil rights movement, I mean, there were abolitionists at the founding, you know, in the 1700s of America, and you know, the issue, it didn't get any traction for so long. And so like to me, the tried and true methods of like, okay, writing newspaper articles, writing books, talking to people, that stuff takes a long time. And you know, I want to spend my resources on things that are quicker. And you know, I think it's great that people write books and, like I said, newspaper articles, but I don't see the results from a lot of those activities. Where I know if I go out robbing, you know, it's immediate results. I see it right there, and it's more satisfying to me. I know I'm making a difference. I know I saved 60 people today. You know, like it feels good. But are there any other questions?
I want to make a comment about Paul's point. A lot of the activism methods that people disagree with happen to be things that happen on the spur of the moment that you weren't really planning for. And those instances also tend to be some of my favorite, the most impactful. One that comes to mind is James sitting on his chalking in front of the courthouse. He had drawn a picture of Robin Hood. The city agents decided to wipe it away with a hose, and he decided to sit on his drawings to preserve it, so that, you know, they're not going to hose me, right? But they did. And people would say, well, you know, why would you do that? Or why would you, you know, you're making a scene, or I don't agree with that method, right? But it's not like he says, oh, I go out every day and I sit on chalking. You know, it comes from a place of like, I have to do something in this moment. And it has, you know, I don't know what, you know, I'm going to do something right now. and it's not always planned, but I think a lot of the criticism comes from instances like that, and not so much like the daily Robin Hooding.
And I think a lot of people's uncomfortability, I'll get to you in a moment, I think a lot of people's uncomfortability from a situation like that is that it forces them to address it, right? Because they don't want to. You don't want to see somebody get hosed down. You don't want to see a situation like that, and it forces people to look at that and come up with an opinion about it. And they would rather not. They would rather not have been challenged with that video. They would rather not have been challenged with knowing that their government agents, the ones that they have been told we're the government and you elected us, and all these cliched sort of excuses. They don't want to believe that their neighbors. In a lot of cases, these are people they might know as well. Talk about Keene being a small town. When some bureaucrat misbehaves, a lot of the people who feel uncomfortable about that probably know who that person is. They might go to church with him or her. They might have some sort of a social group interaction with that person. They may be their friends. For whatever reason, these people know one another, and so to see someone they know behaving, George the janitor sprayed down that boy with a hose. Well, he must have done something to deserve that. My friend wouldn't do anything bad like that. So who knows what internal conversations people are having, and that they're forced to have by this direct action. In a lot of cases, we're talking about non-cooperation. Basically, it wasn't civil disobedience. You just were kind of obstructing what they were trying to do. So let's go on here.
We started the panel discussion on ticketing, and sometimes we do get tickets. Right now, I have a case on appeal before the New Hampshire Supreme Court. I committed the victimless crime of forgetting to have my vehicle inspected. What you want to do is you don't even want to take this to court. You want to stop it at the court. In order for a case, for a judge to hear a case, the judge has to have jurisdiction. And yes, I lived in a town, I lived in the state of New Hampshire, but my question to the prosecutor during discovery was, what evidence do you have that the Constitution and the codes are applicable to me? If there is no evidence, there's no jurisdiction. There will not be a court case. The prosecutor said to me in discovery on the phone, well, I have no evidence that the Constitution and the codes are applicable to you. I tried to bring this up in court at the hearing, that there is no jurisdiction because you have no evidence that the codes are applicable to me. And because the judge assumed jurisdiction without having jurisdiction, it's now on appeal to the New Hampshire Supreme Court. So that's something that everybody here needs to question them, because there is no evidence that the codes are applicable to any of us. They'll bring up the social contract, and a contract is where somebody does one thing and somebody else does another thing for them. We have contracted originally to give up some of our rights to get protection of our life and property from the state. 156 years ago, the Supreme Court said the state owes you no protection. So they have canceled the contract. There is now no evidence that the Constitution and the codes are applicable. Remember that.
I've actually asked that question in court, so I support that approach of questioning just the fundamentals of the system. And if I signed a contract, I'd really like to see it. So can you provide that? And I'm interested to know, Dan, is it?
Yeah.
What happens? Because I've asked that question in court, and of course I've lost, as you did as well at the district court level. But I don't like to give money to the state, so I've never appealed it. So I'm glad that you have appealed on this. And when you get a result, if you could email that to news@freekeene.com, that goes out to multiple recipients at Free Keene, and we're going to get that information. I want to publicize that. I want to find out what the Supreme Court says.
Yeah, I want it to be publicized.
So please, news@freekeene.com, reach out to us on that.
I'd like to say too, I appreciate Dan, you know, you doing it, stepping up to the plate. I mean, one of the things I think about direct action, I mean, you don't have to like commit your life to this. You don't have to, you just start somewhere. You know, you don't have to go out and film a police officer, and you know, you don't have to go to the max immediately. Like I feel like you should, like baby steps. I mean, just start doing whatever you want to do. Hold a sign, and you get better and better and better at things. It's like anything in life. The more you do it, the better you get. And I don't think anyone should be discouraged. Take a parking ticket to trial. I mean, you just start with anything small. And if one of your goals is to be a direct action activist and, you know, be maybe sitting on this panel or whatever, being kind of living the life, if you will. I mean, you got to start somewhere, and you can do just so many little things. You could, as one gentleman said, you could just go around and fill the meters and not tell anyone, or put some cards out, or I don't think anyone should be discouraged, and everyone, whatever you do, just start somewhere, I guess is my little motivating speech here at the end.
So you guys have recorded a lot of stuff. You've had cameras knocked around. You've had cameras taken. What would you recommend for actually carrying and using? Do you guys have a particular brand of camera that you like, or a type of camera, like something you want something small that's easy to carry, you can use? What are your recommendations on that?
Canon Vixia, right? Am I right?
Startup times on the Vixia are
I've been
long.
using Canon Vixias as well.
Sony Handycam and Canon Vixias are the most popular.
Can we get that on mic though, please?
Yeah. Sony Handycams and Canon Vixias have become the activism standard, I think. Yeah, they're cheap enough, and if they get stolen, you don't cry. And the replacement parts, other people have them. They're great tools.
I would say too, I mean, I started off with a flip video camera, just a real cheap one. That is a cheap way to do it. It works pretty well. One of the issues I had was like I was holding it and like someone knocked it out of my hands onto the ground. And something like this, you can get a little bit better hold. It'll have better. This is a Sony Handycam. It's like a $200 camera. You probably can find it on eBay for even less. It shoots HD. The audio is great. As Garrett was pointing out, the startup time is phenomenal. Like you open the screen and, you know, okay, it's on, you know, it's ready to go. So I mean, like Garrett and I both use Handycams now. And, you know, Garrett has like a few little tools maybe he can show you. He has like a little grip there for stabilization. There's some things you can do to further improve your tools. You want to comment on that?
Sure. One of the things, if I'm out doing Robin Hooding, I'm probably carrying that contraption called the X-Grip. It's a U-shaped design. That makes things so much more convenient. You can be filming behind yourself by just holding it in front of you and looking at the screen, or you can be filming like over your shoulder. You can mount it on your shoulder. So that device I'd highly recommend. $20 on Amazon for an X-Grip. You can put it in your belt so you can conveniently carry the camera. About the different types of cameras, I started off with a Vixia from Canon. They run about $300 on the lower end. They're great, very high quality image, very high quality mic, not that great in low light. The cheaper Sony Handycam that James was mentioning, very good in low light. If you're going to be shooting at night, if you're doing police accountability stuff in low light, that's what you want, is the Sony Handycam or other cameras that have good low light quality. And the startup time is really important, because if you're in a situation where you need to film, you probably should have already been filming by the time you realize